The Nexus Arena floated in the void between three star systems like a crystalline tumor, beautiful and entirely too pleased with itself. Its bioluminescent walls pulsed with the rhythm of 1,000 different alien heartbeats, each species contributing their own particular brand of anticipation to the cosmic soup of excitement. Today marked the 700th anniversary of the Velocity trials, and the universe had gathered to watch beings tear through space-time like it owed them money. The trials weren't just some weekend entertainment for bored civilizations with too much technology and not enough sense. Oh no, this was serious business wrapped in pageantry and sealed with enough political implications to choke a Zarathi warbeast. The winner's home system would claim exclusive mining rights to the Kronos Nebula, a swirling mass of exotic matter worth approximately 17 times the gross domestic product of most galactic sectors. In other words, enough wealth to buy a small galaxy or finance a really impressive midlife crisis. Species had been preparing for this moment for decades. The Velkari had genetically modified their champions over 6 generations, creating living missiles with consciousness. The Thalorian Collective had uploaded their finest warriors into quantum processing matrices, claiming pure thought moved faster than any biological limitation. Even the usually pacifist Menthari had shown up with a representative who could allegedly fold space-time around himself like origami. Then Earth had submitted their entry form. The Galactic Registry Office had initially assumed it was a clerical error. Surely the primitive bipeds from the third rock orbiting that unremarkable yellow star weren't serious about competing. Humans barely qualified as spacefaring, having only discovered faster-than-light travel through what most civilizations generously termed aggressive stumbling. Their technology relied on crude fusion reactions and what appeared to be percussive maintenance. Their societies still used something called money instead of evolved post-scarcity resource allocation algorithms. But the paperwork was legitimate, filed through proper diplomatic channels and bearing all the correct authentication code. Earth was sending a representative to compete for rights they couldn't possibly understand the value of, using abilities they certainly didn't possess. The betting pools had exploded with activity. Verkarian bookmakers were offering odds of 84 to 193 to 1 against the human victory, numbers so astronomical they'd invented new mathematical concepts just to express the impossibility. The Zentaurian Probability Consortium had declared the humans' participation a statistical anomaly so unlikely it violated several laws of mathematics and at least 3 principles of common sense. What made the whole situation even more delicious was Earth's choice of champion, not some grizzled military specimen pumped full of cybernetic enhancements. Not a genetically modified super soldier bred in laboratories and raised on a diet of pure velocity. No, they'd sent what appeared to be an ordinary young female, barely past adolescence by human standards, wearing simple athletic clothing that looked like it had been purchased from a primitive textile distribution facility. She'd arrived 3 days ago on a transport that the harbor control systems had initially mistaken for space debris. While other champions underwent elaborate preparation rituals involving meditation chambers, probability calculators and ceremonial consumption of velocity-enhancing substance, the human had spent her time sitting in the observation deck, apparently watching ships dock with the sort of mild interest most beings reserved for watching paint dry on a molecular level. The Thalorian delegation had invited her to observe their champion's preparation session, where quantum-enhanced reflexes were being calibrated to react faster than light itself could travel. She'd declined politely, mentioning something about needing to stretch her legs. The Velkari combat forms had offered to analyze her biological composition for optimization purposes. She'd responded with what their translation matrices interpreted as "thanks, but I'm good." Even now, as the opening ceremonies commenced with enough pomp to make a supernova feel inadequate, she sat in the competitors section looking supremely unbothered. Other champions were performing pre-competition rituals that involved manipulating local gravitational fields or temporarily existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The human was tying her shoelace. The arena's announcement system crackled to life, broadcasting in 700 different languages simultaneously. Honored beings, we gather today to witness the ultimate test of velocity, where the fastest among us will claim dominion over the cosmos itself. Champion after champion was introduced to thunderous approval. The Zarathi representative could move so fast he existed as a probability cloud. The Corvani entry had surgically replaced her nervous system with crystalline matrices that operated at light speed. The Zentran warrior had trained in time-dilated chambers where he'd spent subjective centuries perfecting the art of motion. Then came Earth's turn. From the Sol system, representing the human species, the announcer paused, apparently double-checking his note. A being who has submitted no performance records, no genetic modifications, and no technological enhancements of any kind. The silence that followed was the sort typically reserved for moments when someone's just announced they've accidentally deleted the universe's backup file. Then the laughter started. Not malicious laughter, exactly, but the kind of condescending chuckles that civilizations make when they encounter something so quaint it's almost charming. Like watching a primitive species discover fire while you're casually rearranging solar system. The human stood up, waved briefly to the crowd with the sort of casual gesture someone might use to greet a neighbor, and sat back down. That was it. No dramatic posturing, no display of otherworldly abilities, no attempt to intimidate competitors who could literally move faster than causality itself. She just looked ready, calm, like she was waiting for a bus that was running slightly late but would definitely show up eventually. The opening ceremonies continued for another hour, complete with holographic displays showing the theoretical maximum speeds achievable by various forms of matter and energy. Mathematical equations danced through the air, demonstrating the precise calculations required to move fast enough to win. Meanwhile, the human appeared to be taking a nap. As the festivities wound down and competitors began their final preparations, one thing became abundantly clear to every advanced civilization watching. They were about to witness either the most spectacular failure in galactic history, or something that would force them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the universe. Most were betting on the spectacular failure. After all, what could one small human possibly do against the combined technological and evolutionary superiority of 700 civilizations? They were about to find out exactly how dangerous that question could be. The competitor analysis sessions began at what most civilizations optimistically called dawn. Though the Nexus Arena existed in a perpetual state of artificial illumination that made temporal concepts about as useful as a chocolate teapot, each champion underwent detailed biomechanical scanning, their capabilities measured, cataloged and broadcast across the galaxy for the viewing pleasure of beings who had nothing better to do than watch other beings prepare to move really fast. First up was the Valkyrie combat form, a creature that had undergone so many genetic modifications it barely qualified as belonging to its original species. Standing 3 meters tall with limbs that seemed to exist in a state of constant motion even while stationary, it represented the pinnacle of biological engineering. The scanners revealed reflexes operating at 0.003 seconds, muscle fibers capable of contracting faster than most species could perceive, and a nervous system that had been replaced with something resembling crystallized lightning. The crowd made appropriate sounds of awe and terror. The odds against the human shifted from astronomical to requiring new branches of mathematics. Next came the Thylorian quantum consciousness, a being that had transcended physical limitations by uploading their essence into a mobile processing matrix. The entity flickered between states of existence like a cosmic strobe light, demonstrating its ability to process information at speeds that made light appear to be moving through thick syrup. When asked to demonstrate its velocity, it proceeded to solve 17 different mathematical theorems, compose a symphony, and reorganize the molecular structure of a nearby asteroid in what the timekeepers generously measured as zero. The betting pools weren't just favoring other competitors anymore. They were taking wagers on whether the human would even be visible during her attempt to compete. The Zerathi representative proved to be particularly entertaining, existing primarily as a controlled probability field that occasionally condensed into something resembling physical matter. When it moved, reality hiccuped. Space-time developed what could charitably be called performance anxiety. The demonstration left several junior physicists in the observation deck questioning their life choices, and at least one Zentarian mathematician filing for early retirement. Then the scanning equipment turned toward the human. She approached the analysis platform with the same casual demeanor she'd maintained throughout the entire proceedings. Like someone heading to a routine medical checkup, rather than a cosmic evaluation that would determine her species' place in galactic hierarchy. The advanced bioscanners, devices capable of detecting quantum fluctuations in cellular mitochondria, whirred to life with the enthusiasm of machines that lived for this sort of work. The results were underwhelming. Standard bipedal humanoid configuration. Skeletal structure composed of calcium phosphate compounds, arranged in what could generously be called adequate patterns. Musculature showing no signs of genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, or even basic optimization protocols. Nervous system operating on electrochemical impulses at speeds that wouldn't impress a particularly ambitious sloth. The Corvani lead scientist actually recalibrated his equipment twice, convinced there had been some sort of malfunction. When the readings remained consistently mundane, he broadcast his findings with the sort of bewildered disappointment typically reserved for discovering that a highly anticipated restaurant serves nothing but stale crackers. Reflexes measure at approximately 0.25 seconds, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic disappointment. Muscle composition shows no exotic modifications. Brain activity suggests standard mammalian cognitive processing with no quantum enhancement whatsoever. The silence that followed was so profound it created its own gravitational field. Several species representatives looked around nervously, wondering if this was some sort of elaborate practical joke that would end with hidden cameras emerging from interdimensional pockets. The human, meanwhile, shrugged, as if being declared the biological equivalent of mobile furniture was something that happened to her every day and she'd learned to live with it. The galactic media networks were having an absolute field day. The Zentarian Broadcasting Collective's main anchor, a being whose species had evolved past the need for physical form and existed primarily as organized electromagnetic radiation, delivered what would later be considered one of the most memorable sports commentary segments in galactic history. Beings across the cosmos, the anchor proclaimed, "We are witnessing what may be the greatest mismatch in competitive history. It's like watching a primitive combustion engine compete against a controlled star in a race to see which can generate more energy." The human's biological specifications suggest she would have trouble outrunning several varieties of sedentary plant life. The pre-competition training demonstrations only made things worse. The Menthari representative had requested use of the arena's central platform to showcase his space-folding ability. Within moments he had compressed a 1,000-meter dash into what appeared to be a single step, arriving at the finish line before most observers could register that he had left the starting position. The Corvani champion followed with a display that involved moving so fast she created temporary tears in local reality. The tears quickly healed themselves, but not before allowing glimpses into parallel dimensions, where slightly different versions of the competition were taking place. In at least 3 of those dimensions, the human wasn't even present, having apparently been disqualified for insufficient existence. When offered the opportunity to demonstrate her own abilities, the human politely declined, mentioning something about not wanting to peak too early. Several translation matrices crashed trying to process what they interpreted as either profound strategic thinking or complete delusion. The Velkari delegation took it upon themselves to provide helpful advice, suggesting training regimens that might improve her performance from catastrophically inadequate to merely hopeless. They recommended genetic therapy, cybernetic enhancement, or at minimum some sort of performance-enhancing pharmaceutical intervention. The human thanked them for their concern and mentioned she was good to go. What made the situation particularly amusing to cosmic observers was the complete lack of intimidation the human displayed. Other competitors had spent their preparation time engaging in psychological warfare, demonstrating abilities that defied several laws of physics, and at least one principle of common decency. The Zerati representative had casually mentioned that its species used light-speed travel for their daily commute. The Thalorian consciousness had solved the unified field theory as a warm-up exercise. The human had spent her time reading what appeared to be a primitive text-based entertainment medium, occasionally glancing up to watch the demonstrations with the sort of mild interest someone might show while observing weather patterns. As the final preparations concluded and competitors began their pre-race meditation, probability calculations, or ritualistic communion with velocity itself, The human did something that stopped conversations across 17 different observation decks. She started doing jumping jacks, not complex biomechanical optimization exercises, not quantum-enhanced movement patterns, jumping jacks. The sort of basic physical activity that most civilizations had abandoned sometime around their Bronze Age equivalent. The Corvani chief strategist actually requested medical assistance, convinced he was experiencing some sort of perception-based malfunction. The Thalorian quantum consciousness flickered between dimensions in what its translators interpreted as confused laughter. But perhaps most telling was the reaction of the ancient Primarch observers, being so old they remembered when the galaxy was still figuring out which end of a star produced light. They watched the humans' simple exercise routine with what their facial appendages suggested was either amusement or concern. When asked for comment, the eldest among them simply stated that the universe had a peculiar sense of humor and recommended that everyone pay very close attention to what was about to happen. As the competition drew near, one thing had become crystal clear to everyone watching. They were about to witness either the most thorough humiliation in galactic sporting history, or something that would require them to completely reconsider their understanding of physics, biology, and the fundamental nature of motion itself. The smart money was still on humiliation. After all, how could one primitive human possibly compete against the combined evolutionary and technological superiority of the galaxies? They were about to discover that sometimes the universe's biggest surprises come in the smallest, most unassuming packages. The tournament bracket had been arranged with all the careful consideration of a cosmic funeral director, organizing the galaxy's most elaborate burial ceremony. The human had been placed in the preliminary rounds against opponents that the organizing committee clearly viewed as adequate warm-up exercises for the real competition. It was the sort of matchmaking that suggested either profound ignorance or spectacular cruelty, depending on one's perspective. The arena's central platform reconfigured itself into a kilometer-long track that existed in folded space-time, allowing spectators to observe the entire course simultaneously, while the competitors experienced it as a straight line. Quantum cameras positioned at intervals that defied Euclidean geometry, prepared to capture every microsecond of what promised to be either athletic brilliance or educational disaster. The first preliminary heat featured 12 competitors from various mid-tier civilizations, species that had achieved faster than light travel but hadn't quite figured out how to make reality their personal plaything. The draconian representative could move fast enough to create sonic booms in vacuum. The Altarian entry had replaced their legs with gravitational manipulation devices. The Proximan competitor existed primarily as organized energy that occasionally remembered to maintain a physical form. And then there was the human, standing at her assigned starting position, like someone waiting for a particularly slow elevator. The starting signal would be a burst of coherent tachyon radiation, detectable across multiple dimensions, and impossible to miss unless one's sensory apparatus had been replaced with decorative crystal. Competitors assumed their ready positions, which in several cases involved existing in multiple probability states simultaneously, or temporarily divorcing themselves from linear time. The human bent forward slightly, placing one foot behind the other in what biomechanical analysis later identified as a standard bipedal locomotion preparation stance. The sort of position that suggested she intended to actually run rather than manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. The tachyon burst fired. What happened next would be debated by physicists, philosophers, and very confused sports commentators for the next several centuries. In the time it takes for a conscious mind to register the concept of motion, the race was over. Not over quickly in the sense that beings who could manipulate space-time might finish a race quickly. Over in the sense that it had concluded before most observers' brains had finished processing the starting signal. The human stood at the finish line, not breathing heavily, not showing signs of exertion, looking around with the sort of mild confusion someone displays when they arrive at a party and realize they might be early. The silence that followed wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a profound negation of noise that seemed to actively consume ambient audio. Several species representatives checked their chronometers, convinced the devices had malfunctioned. The quantum cameras designed to capture events occurring at near light speed
had recorded nothing but a blur that their analysis programs refused to classify as anything more specific than motion-related anomaly. The Corvani race official requested an immediate The arena's temporal recording systems, capable of slowing down events that occurred faster than light itself could travel, projected the race sequence onto holographic displays throughout the facility. Everyone watched the starting signal fire. They watched 11 competitors begin their various forms of super-accelerated movement. They watched the human disappear, not vanish in the sense of becoming invisible or phasing into an alternate dimension, simply disappear from one location and reappear at another, with no visible transition period or observable method of travel. The draconian competitor, who had been leading the pack through pure application of muscular physics, was still approximately 700 meters from the finish line when the replay ended. The race steward, a being whose species had evolved specifically to observe and officiate high-speed competitions, requested a second replay, then a third. Each viewing revealed the same impossible sequence: the human moving from point A to point B, with no measurable duration of travel. Technical malfunction, declared the Thalorian representative, its quantum consciousness flickering with what translated as nervous laughter. The recording equipment obviously failed to capture the actual movement sequence, but the arena's systems were functioning perfectly. Every sensor, every detector, every piece of measurement equipment, designed by the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, had recorded the same result. The human had completed a 1,000-meter race in 0 elapsed time. The preliminary rounds continued, because cosmic bureaucracy waits for no impossible physical phenomenon. The human was matched against increasingly formidable opponents, as the organizing committee desperately tried to understand what they had witnessed. Perhaps it had been a fluke. Perhaps their previous analysis had missed some crucial enhancement. Perhaps the human had concealed advanced technology that their scanners couldn't detect. Her second opponent was a Centaurian probability dancer, a being that could move by adjusting the likelihood of being in specific locations, rather than actually traveling between them. The race lasted exactly as long as the first 0 seconds. The Centaurian, who had been calculating probability matrices that would place him at the finish line before the race began, found himself still at the starting line while the human waved at him from the end of the track. The third opponent was a Zerathi Voidwalker, capable of stepping outside normal space-time to bypass the inconvenience of distance. The result was becoming predictable. The human appeared at the finish line before the race had technically begun, while her opponent was still in the process of phasing out of reality. By the fourth race, the arena had fallen into a kind of religious silence, the sort of quiet that develops when thousands of highly advanced civilizations simultaneously realized that their understanding of physics might be about as accurate as a drunken Regilian's attempt at orbital mechanics. The human's fourth opponent was the Corvani champion herself, the being with crystalline nervous systems, operating at light speed. She had requested this match specifically, convinced that the human must be using some form of technology that her enhanced senses could detect and count. The tachyon burst fired. The Corvani champion, her perception accelerated to nearly relativistic speeds, watched in frame-by-frame detail as the human simply ceased to exist at the starting line, and began existing at the finish line. No intermediate steps, no travel time, no energy expenditure that her sensors could detect. The human had apparently decided that the space between 2 points was more of a suggestion than a requirement. When the Corvani champion finally reached the finish line, several subjective hours later from her accelerated perspective, she found the human sitting cross-legged on the track, apparently waiting patiently for the race to officially conclude. The arena's chief physicist, a Menthori, whose species had solved faster than light travel by convincing the universe that distance was a social construct, requested immediate access to the human for detailed analysis. His scanner readings showed standard human biology with no exotic modifications, no hidden technology, and no apparent method for the observed locomotion. "How?" he asked, his translation matrix struggling to convey the depth of confusion in the simple word. The human shrugged again, that same casual gesture that was becoming her signature response to cosmic bewilderment. "I just ran really fast. The physicist's biorhythms fluctuated in patterns his species associated with existential crisis. But our measurements indicate you moved faster than instantaneous travel. You arrived at the destination before you left the origin point. Yeah, the human agreed. That happens sometimes. The betting pools had stopped taking wagers. The Verkarian bookmakers had declared the situation mathematically impossible to quantify, and were considering early retirement. The Zentaurian Probability Consortium had issued a statement claiming that the humans' performance violated causality so thoroughly that they were no longer certain the tournament was actually taking place. As news of the preliminary results spread across the galaxy, emergency sessions convened in scientific academies, military strategic commands, and philosophical discussion groups. If one primitive human could move faster than beings who had transcended physical limitations, what did that mean for everything they thought they knew about the universe? The tournament continued because stopping it would require admitting that 700 advanced civilizations had been fundamentally wrong about reality. The human advanced through each bracket, with the same casual ease she had demonstrated from the beginning, defeating opponents who could manipulate time, space, probability, and the fundamental forces of existence.
With each victory, the silence in the arena grew more profound. It wasn't just shock anymore. It was the sound of an entire galaxy's worth of assumptions crumbling like poorly constructed sandcastles in a tsunami. The human, meanwhile, seemed entirely unaware of the cosmic implications of her performance. Between races, she continued reading her primitive entertainment medium, occasionally accepting refreshments from bewildered concession vendors who weren't sure if they should be honored or terrified to serve someone who appeared to have broken the universe. As the final bracket approached, one question dominated every conversation, every analysis session, every desperate scientific inquiry across the known galaxy. If this was what an ordinary human could do, what exactly had Earth been hiding? They were about to find out that sometimes the most dangerous assumptions are the ones you never realize you're making. The championship final featured the human against the defending Galactic champion, a Primarch entity that had held the title for the last 3 centuries by existing in a state of controlled temporal acceleration. This being didn't just move fast, it experienced time at rates that made geological processes appear instantaneous. When it moved, entire civilizations could rise and fall before it completed a single step. The race lasted exactly as long as every other race the human had participated in. 0 seconds. The Primarch champion, a being older than most solar systems and theoretically incapable of surprise, stood at the starting line for what subjectively felt like several decades, processing what had just occurred. When the temporal acceleration finally wore off and it returned to normal time, the first words it spoke in nearly a millennium were, "Well, that's deeply concerning." The award ceremony proceeded with all the enthusiasm of a funeral for the laws of physics. The human accepted her trophy, a crystallized fragment of space-time worth more than several planetary economies, with the same casual grace she had shown throughout the entire competition. When asked for a victory speech, she thanked everyone for a fun afternoon, and mentioned that she was looking forward to getting home because her favorite show was on tonight. The galactic community's response was swift and predictable. Emergency scientific conferences convened across 17 different dimensions. The Corvani Institute of Advanced Physics declared a state of academic emergency and began questioning everything they had ever published. The Thalorian Collective temporarily shut down their quantum consciousness network to prevent what they termed reality-based system corruption. Meanwhile, Earth's diplomatic status underwent what bureaucrats politely called rapid recalibration. The mining rights to the Kronos Nebula were transferred with such haste that several clerical errors resulted in Earth accidentally acquiring ownership of 2 additional star systems and a small moon that nobody remembered adding to the prize pool. The most telling response came from the galaxy's intelligence services. Within hours of the tournament's conclusion, reconnaissance missions were being planned to Earth, with the specific objective of determining how many more humans possessed similar capabilities. The working assumption, whispered in secure communications across the galaxy, was that if they had sent what appeared to be an ordinary representative, their actual military forces might be capable of literally anything. The Zentaurian Strategic Assessment Division released a classified report whose conclusions were so alarming that reading it required special psychological preparation. The document suggested that humanity might represent a threat level previously thought to be purely theoretical, a species capable of casual violations of fundamental reality. But perhaps the most profound change occurred in how the galaxy viewed speed itself. Racing competitions throughout civilized space were quietly suspended pending technological recalibration. The velocity trials were renamed to something less ambitious and moved to a different dimension entirely. Several species began developing new philosophical frameworks to accommodate the possibility that their understanding of motion had been fundamentally flawed. The human, meanwhile, had returned to Earth, aboard the same unremarkable transport she had arrived in. When asked by curious reporters about her training regimen, she mentioned that she ran track in high school, and sometimes jogged around her neighborhood when the weather was nice. The interviewer, a being whose species had evolved beyond the need for physical form specifically to better understand motion, reportedly experienced what medical professionals classified as an existential breakdown. 3 months later, Earth received a formal diplomatic inquiry from the Galactic Council. The message, transmitted through 17 different encryption protocols and authenticated by quantum signatures that took up more memory than most civilizations' entire cultural databases, contained a single question: how many more of you are there? Earth's response, delivered through standard diplomatic channels with characteristic human directness, was even more terrifying than the aliens had feared. "Oh, she was actually one of our slower ones. We didn't want to show off." The silence that followed this communication lasted approximately 6 standard months and created its own gravitational anomaly. As cosmic society slowly adapted to its new reality, one fact became abundantly clear to every advanced civilization in the galaxy: they had spent centuries developing increasingly sophisticated methods to move fast, manipulate space-time, and transcend physical limitations, while somewhere in an unremarkable star system, an entire species had simply figured out how to run really, really well. The universe, it turned out, had been keeping score all along, and humanity had apparently been winning by margins so vast that other species hadn't even realized they were playing the same game. Looking back, the most remarkable thing about the whole affair wasn't that the humans had capabilities beyond galactic comprehension. It was that they had bothered to participate in a formal competition at all, when they could have simply jogged past every other species in the galaxy and arrived wherever they were going before anyone noticed they had left. But then again, that was probably the most human thing about the entire situation. Showing up to a cosmic speed competition, not to demonstrate superiority, but just because someone had invited them and it seemed like it might be fun.